happened around June 9th.
Right.
And our goal here is really to understand the new tensions, the things that have cropped up even after that truce they agreed in Geneva back in May.
Yeah, the Geneva deal, that was the one with the 90-day pause, right?
Yeah.
U.S. tariffs at 30%, China's at 10%.
Exactly. Meant to be a cool down period.
But as the sources show, it hasn't really been that calm, has it? It's more like,
Yeah.
well, you solve one problem and two more pop up. It's that kind of negotiation.
Right. Okay, so let's unpack that. Your sources are pretty clear that the truce felt fragile almost immediately.
Hmm.
One report says, new disputes emerge ahead of U.S.-China trade talks in London, expected to take up a series of fresh disputes, threatening a fragile truce. It sounds like fingers started pointing pretty quickly.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Both sides accusing the other of, undermining the spirit of the agreement almost straight away.
And one of the big new things, according to the sources, is rare earths. China using that as leverage.
That's a major one, yes. These aren't just any materials. The sources call them vital for EVs, phones, defense tech, critical stuff.
And China did what? Froze export licenses.
That's what's reported. They froze export licenses, causing, well, quite a bit of disruption globally.
Yeah.
Automakers, for instance, were hit.
Wow. Okay. And the U.S. view is?
The U.S. is basically saying, hey, you agreed to resume exports in Geneva, stick to the deal. But China's response, reportedly, is more nuanced, claiming some approvals are still happening.
Do we know how many, is it a trickle or something more significant?
The sources don't give exact numbers, no. But the tension itself is the key takeaway. An AP source points out, one area where China holds the upper hand is in the mining and processing of rare earths.
So they have real leverage there.
They do, and you can see the frustration it causes. One source picked up a social media comment basically saying, the bad news is that China has totally violated its agreement with us.
That's strong language. Shows how raw the nerves are.
Exactly. Trust erodes fast in these situations.
So while China's playing the rare earths card, the U.S. is hitting back on tech.
That's the other side of the coin. The U.S. is tightening controls on advanced semiconductors, AI chips, specifically targeting things like Huawei's Ascend chip.
And China sees that as violating the Geneva spirit.
Precisely. They view it as contradicting the idea of cooling things down. The U.S. Commerce Department even put out guidance suggesting these Huawei chips might violate controls because they were likely developed with American technology despite restrictions.
So limiting access to U.S. tech know-how, that's been a strategy for a while, hasn't it?
It has. The sources note these kinds of export controls go back to the first Trump administration, and they've actually expanded since Geneva.
So the tariff pause didn't pause the tech competition?
Not at all. If anything, it seems to have heated up.
Okay, so London wasn't just about these new fights. It was also meant to follow up on the original tariff truce itself.
That was definitely on the agenda. Try and move beyond the 90-day pause, looking for more durable arrangements and dispute mechanisms, something longer term.
And the markets are watching this closely.
Oh, absolutely. That Geneva pause brought some stability to stocks, but businesses are still nervous. Will tariffs just snap back after 90 days? They need certainty.
Makes sense. Hard to plan otherwise.
Exactly. One source really captured it, saying there's a need to get these really, I think, quite destructive tariff rates down permanently so that firms can begin to make plans.
Permanently, though. Is that realistic?
Well, that same source adds a dose of realism. They say there is really no world in which we think that there won't be tariffs on most of our trading partners, perhaps at 10%, with higher tariffs on most Chinese goods.
So maybe lower, but not gone.
That seems to be the more likely hope, yeah. Lower and more predictable.
Now, there's another piece here, slightly different. The U.S. revoking visas for some Chinese students, citing national security.
Yeah, that's a really interesting element because, visas aren't typically bundled into trade talks.
But China's linking them.
According to the sources, yes. They're pointing to it as another example of the U.S. breaking the Geneva spirit, undermining the deal.
How so?
Well, the Chinese Commerce Ministry is quoted saying the U.S. has unilaterally provoked new economic and trade frictions, and they specifically mentioned the visa revocations as part of that.
And there's backing for the U.S. side.
The sources mentioned Secretary of State Marco Rubio reportedly saying the U.S. would aggressively revoke visas for students linked to the CCP or studying in critical fields.
So it's all getting tangled together, rare earths, tech, visas, used as evidence by both sides.
Exactly. Each side sees their actions as justified responses and the other side's actions as violations. It's a complex web.
Which leads to what seems like a key point in your sources. Nothing much is really moving without higher level involvement.
That's a strong theme. Progress is seen as a bit stalled. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is mentioned as indicating this. The consensus seems to be you need the presidents, Trump and Xi, to really engage directly for any major shifts.
Yeah, one source put it bluntly. Expect progress only if Trump and Xi truly engage. And the clock's ticking on those tariffs.
Right. Ticking toward the lift or reinstatement of tariffs later in the summer. It really suggests the negotiators on the ground might just be managing the friction, not resolving the core issues. That needs the top bosses.
And this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? How these technical trade disputes, rare earths, chips, tariffs, they don't just stay in government meeting rooms.
Not at all. They ripple outwards. Disruptions in minerals or semiconductors, that affects, the phone in your pocket, the car you drive, supply chains everywhere.
And the threat of tariffs coming back.
That affects costs for everyone, potentially slows manufacturing, impacts jobs.
Yeah.
Even in sectors that might have sort of stocked up before the tariffs first hit, it really shows how interconnected global politics and the economy are.
So wrapping up, the London talks basically highlighted how fragile that Geneva truce was, a real test.
Definitely. And the core challenge seems to be navigating these clashing pressure points. China's leverage on materials like rare earths
Versus the U.S. pressure on critical tech like AI and semiconductors.
Right. And it's worth remembering who's actually in the room for these London talks. High-level people.
Yeah, who was leading the delegations?
For the U.S., Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and USTR Jamieson Greer. And for China, Vice Premier He Lifeng.
So, serious players. They're talking, but the path forward seems tricky.
Very. Navigating all these old and new tensions is incredibly complex.
So, based on everything we've discussed from the sources, what should you be watching for next?
Well, keep an eye on those rare earth export licenses. Does China change its stance?
Yeah.
Also, any shifts in U.S. chip restrictions easing or tightening.
Does the student visa issue stay linked to trade?
That's another one. And crucially, any real steps towards a longer-term tariff framework beyond this 90-day thing, that would be significant.
And maybe most importantly, any signs of Trump and Xi getting more directly involved.
Exactly. The sources really hammer that point home. That seems to be the key for any major movement.
Because the overall vibe from the sources isn't exactly optimistic for quick breakthroughs, is it?
No, not really. They consistently point towards needing that top-level intervention for anything substantial and lasting. And that clock is ticking on the tariff pause expiring later this summer. That's a lot of pressure.
Which leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? Given how shaky the truce is, how quickly these new disputes flared up, rare earths, tech, visas, and this apparent need for the presidents to step in, is finding a stable solution just about negotiating the details, the tariffs, the specific items? Or does it actually require something deeper, a fundamental shift maybe in the whole relationship, the level of trust between the U.S. and China?